Hi, my name is Rachel Dickinson. I'm a graduate student at Morningside College and a middle school ELL teacher, and the title of my study is Dialogue Journals in 7th grade ELL students. ELLs are a growing population in America's schools, and in fact the number of ELLs has doubled in American schools since the 1980s. And in 2015, the NEA reported that ELLs comprised almost 10% of pre-K through 12th grade students. And while their numbers are high, their academic work tends to be lower than their peers. On the National Assessment of Educational Progress, there was between a 36 and 44-point difference between ELL and non-ELLs. And in 2014, only 13% of Hispanic students scored proficient on a writing test. Many ELLs struggle with low organization, vocabulary, content, and grammar skills, which does make writing difficult for them. And writing is such a huge part of how students learn. They need to take notes, they need to fill out lab sheets, they need to write papers, and then these low writing skills tend to lead to low academic success, and that contributes to them actually dropping out of school. And in 2015, the graduation rate of ELLs was more than 20 points below the national graduation rate. So there's been some research on different interventions to use to improve the writing skills of ELLs, and I've highlighted some of them here. Thinking maps were used with elementary schools with some success. That's a type of graphic organizer, and the student scores were able to improve after practicing with those several times. There was a study done with scaffolding and journals where the students followed a very prescribed format of how to write those journals, and that had some success. Didn't quite work with every student, but overall it was successful. There was a study with portfolios and journals with undergraduate students, and both the scores on the portfolios and the dialogue journals did increase, and the authors attribute that to the fact that there was such a corrective feedback format. And then weblogs were used with some elementary students in 21 different schools, and some students worked in groups and some students worked alone. And it turns out that the students that worked alone actually improved more than the students that worked together, and that may have been because they felt more free to create their stories, and then they just felt like they could take more chances. And then we had interactive blogging with some university students also, and that also did work to improve some scores. And the researchers thought that could have been because it just motivated them. Blogging was fun, motivated them, and it improved their confidence in their writing. All of these previously mentioned researchers studied strategies that were related to the constructivist theory by Jean Piaget. And that theory is based on the idea that people connect the understanding of the world and experiences to new information, and that makes new understandings. So learners are able to learn best when they can connect their existing knowledge to new knowledge that is being presented. So when teachers get to know their students and know what their background is, they can then focus lessons and examples around that knowledge and help the individual students make connections and understand the material. So dialogue journals have a number of advantages that are related to the constructivist theory. A dialogue journal is a written conversation between a student and a teacher, and the writing is usually free form. And through the dialogue journals, the teachers get to know their students, and that helps them connect their lessons to their students. But the students also practice writing skills when they use their dialogue journals. They use grammar and vocabulary constructions that they are comfortable with. But then the teachers can write back using a little bit higher level vocabulary and grammar structures. And so then the students are forced to use what they know, connect to what they don't know, and then use that when they are responding back to their teacher. So while many researchers looked at ways to improve the writing skills for ELLs, they're going through all of this research and everything. There was very little research done on dialogue journals, and especially dialogue journals and middle school students' writing skills. So that was the gap in this research, and that's the gap that this study attempted to fill. The reason that I felt this was important personally is that most of my students' scores on the ALPA 21 are lowest in writing, so I do have a strong desire to improve their learning experience and their writing skills. So the purpose of this study was to determine if dialogue journals would improve the writing skills of ELL students. So taking into consideration the past research on ELL writing skills, dialogue journals, and the constructivist theory, it was hypothesized that using the dialogue journals 2 to 3 times a week in the ELL classroom for 6 weeks would improve the writing scores on 7th grade ELL students on the CBM written expression. I had a small number of students to work with, so this is an A/B research designed quantitative study to determine the impact of the dialogue journals on the writing skills of 7th graders. The dependent variable was the participants' writing skills, and the independent variable was the dialogue journals. This study took place in a private middle school in an urban area where 55% of students received tuition assistance. 36 of the students in the school, or 16%, are classified ELL, and that is designated by their scores in the ALPA 21 taken the previous spring. Half of the students in the school, the ELL students, are Hispanic, the other half are from Burma. So I had 12 randomly selected students for this study, 7th grade ELL students. They ranged in age from 11 to 13 years old. 4 were from Burma, 8 were Hispanic, and then there were 4 males and 8 females. We had the same students in the study in the experimental group, and no incentives were given for these students to participate. The curriculum for the baseline phase, the first 6 weeks, was the National Geographic Inside Language Learning Literacy and Content textbook. They also used their iPads. We did grammar exercises at the beginning of class, and then we did vocabulary and reading exercises from the book and tied all that together to write a cause and effect paper. During the intervention phase, students used all the materials from the non-interventive phase, but then we added a 70-page wide spiral notebook and pencil for them to do their journaling in. So the journaling was added during this phase. The assessment tool was the CBM written expression, and that consisted of a prompt written at the top of a piece of paper, and it was scored by correct word sequence. The validity of this tool is 0.6 to 0.8, and the inner score reliability is 0.88 to 0.92. The procedure we followed was that at the beginning of the year, the CBM written expression was given, and the students wrote for 7 minutes on that prompt. Then for the next 6 weeks, we followed the regular writing curriculum. After 6 weeks, we gave the CBM written expression again. The students wrote for 7 minutes, but it was on a different prompt. And then for the next 6 weeks, dialogue journals were added for 10 minutes at the beginning of each class, and then the regular writing curriculum. The dialogue journaling consisted of the students coming into class in the morning, taking their journal and writing for 10 minutes on whatever they felt like writing about, and then the teacher would take those journals at the end and respond back, trying to use a little bit higher level vocabulary, grammar structures, a little bit knowledge that the students would connect to, and hope that they would use that in their next entry. And so after then those 6 weeks, the CBM written expression again was given for 7 minutes. The data was analyzed using a within group paired samples t-test, and that compared the scores on the baseline, middle, and treatment test. However, the results did not confirm the hypothesis. The data failed to reject the null hypothesis. As you can see here on the baseline test, the mean was 40.33, and the midpoint test, the mean was 47.33, while the standardization changed from 28.57 to 27.25. And then on the intervention test, the end test, the mean lowered slightly from 47.3 to 47.25, and the standard deviation changed from 27.25 to 33.35. Here that is in graph form for you to see. And then in addition to the mean and standard deviations, on the baseline to midpoint scores, the p-value was 0.388, and the midpoint to treatment scores, the p-value was 0.991, so both were statistically insignificant. As I looked at that data, I could connect it to some past research in a study by Verep and Swan and Solomon, where the researchers used several scaffolds with the interactive writing techniques, but and some of the students' mistakes increased, whereas others decreased. So those researchers kind of determined that scaffolding might not work for all students, but it is effective for some, and I could see that with the dialogue journals, how that would be effective for some and not for others. But looking at that in relation to the constructivist theory, in order to make the dialogue journals most effective for students, it is very important to connect that new knowledge to background knowledge. So the teachers really need to push the students with using new grammar, new vocabulary in their writing. Some of the limitations to this study is that it was conducted over a short amount of time. The students met every other day for 42 minutes for 12 weeks. However, only 6 weeks of that every other day was in the treatment phase. Therefore, writing skills do take a while to develop, and this may not have been quite enough time for them to develop. There's also a small sample size. 12 participants from one grade level can't really represent all of the middle school students, and there were only 2 ethnicities represented, and 2 ethnicities definitely cannot represent all of ELL students. Plus, there were different writing systems, and that could definitely create different challenges to acquiring grammar and spelling and vocabulary. The time of year this study was given could have also had an effect. It was given at the beginning of the year when the students had not been in school for 3 months, so the baseline score may have appeared lower than it actually was, and so that the difference between the baseline and the midpoint may have been actually bigger than it may have appeared bigger than it actually was. The measurement tool may not have been appropriate for all participants. The prompts should use background knowledge so that they can write on a topic they are familiar with. However, the researcher might not have known the participants well enough to write an appropriate prompt, so this may have hindered how much the participants could write. Another limitation of the measurement tool is that it does measure all elements of writing at once, so it's difficult to improve all areas of writing at once. And then a fifth limitation is that the dialogue journals didn't always follow the prescribed format, where it was supposed to be a written back and forth conversation where the teacher used higher level grammar and vocabulary. The participants were supposed to incorporate that into their writing. The participants didn't always respond to the feedback. Instead, some wrote stories and others began new topics. So they were not necessarily using the suggested feedback and experiences in higher level grammar, vocabulary, and spelling. So some recommendation is to conduct this study over a longer length of time, possibly the whole school year, or follow these participants through different grade levels. Also to use a larger group of participants, particularly participants with a variety of ethnicities and ages should be used. Also, possibly other grade levels or students at different writing proficiency levels. And a third recommendation is to focus on one element of writing at a time instead of trying to get them to learn and correct all of them. Implications for participants is that it was very personalized responses from their teacher. They were encouraged to use their background knowledge and experiences, which gave them a feeling of validity in the classroom, and they really did appear to enjoy telling their stories. Implications for teachers is that they were allowed to move at each participant's pace, so they could adapt the instructional practices after seeing the writing levels, and they could learn about each participant and their background. And this was an effective strategy with some participants, so it really should be considered as an instructional strategy. And in conclusion, dialogue journals may still be an effective method for improving writing skills for ELLs, but additional studies are needed.